Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to this webinar that has been organized by the High-Level Panel for Sustainable Ocean Economy, which I'm going to refer afterwards for speed now to the panel. And today we are bringing together special guest speakers from around the world to take part in a roundtable discussion on the importance of ocean finance and investment into a sustainable ocean economy, in order to set us on the path to economic recovery in a post-COVID-19 world. We will also today hear from some of the authors of the panel's latest blue paper, Ocean Finance, which examines how the next generation of financing mechanisms can support the sustainable ocean economy in an inclusive manner, and how catalytic funds can be mobilized to finance it. As with each blue paper and special report commissioned by the panel, we hope this paper helps key decision makers better understand the opportunities for action. My name is Justin Mundy, and I'm a distinguished fellow at the World Resources Institute, and I have the privilege, and I hope the pleasure, of moderating today's event. We have the great honor today of being joined by Mari Pangestu, who is the Managing Director of Development Policy and Partnerships at the World Bank, and is also the expert group co-chair for the Ocean Panel. Mari will give some opening remarks and join the roundtable discussion afterwards. We are also privileged to have with us today Minister Luhut Pandjaitan, who's the Coordinating Minister for Maritime Affairs and Investment in Indonesia. We have Minister Nigel Clarke, who's the Minister of Finance and Public Service in Jamaica, and also Ingrid van Wees, who's the Vice President for Finance and Risk Management at the Asian Development Bank. Also joining us today to give a presentation about the Ocean Finance Blue Paper and to take part in the Q&A session are Rashid Sumaila, who is the Professor and Director of the Fisheries Economics Research Unit at UBC's Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries in Canada, Anthony Cox, who's the Deputy Director of the Environment Directorate at OECD, and last but by no means least, Louise Heaps, who's the Head of Sustainable Blue Economy at WWF UK. If I may, I'd like to give you a very quick overview of the panel. The panel aims to facilitate a better, more resilient future for people and the planet. The goal of the panel is to facilitate the creation of a sustainable ocean economy where effective protection, sustainable production, and equitable prosperity go hand in hand. The Ocean Panel has been working to achieve key objectives that include enhancing humanity's relationship with the ocean, bridging ocean health and wealth, working with diverse stakeholders, harnessing the latest ocean knowledge, and developing an action agenda for transitioning to a sustainable ocean economy. Established in September 2018, the Ocean Panel is made up of 14 serving world leaders, co-chaired by the Prime Minister of Norway and the President of Palau. As you can see from the map, the Ocean Panel comprises members from across the world and is supported by the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Ocean, Peter Thompson. It is the only ocean policy body made up of serving world leaders, and so has the authority needed to trigger, amplify, and accelerate action worldwide for ocean priorities. Before we start the substance of the webinar, I would like to mention a few housekeeping items. We very much welcome engagement on Twitter, and the hashtags to use will be available in the chat box throughout the webinar. Today's blue paper, along with all the other blue papers, are available on the Ocean Panel website, and the link is also in the chat box. We encourage you to post your questions for the blue paper author Q&A session in the Q&A answer box located in the bottom of your screen. And do please indicate which author you would like to respond. And if you can, please do write it as a question rather than as a statement. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to give the floor to Mari Pangestu, who, as I said, is the Managing Director of Development Policy and Partnerships at the World Bank and the co-chair of the HLP's expert group. Mari, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Justin. Excellencies, distinguished participants, and all of you who have joined this virtual event, good morning, good day, wherever you are. It's a pleasure for me to open this event because it is such an important topic, and also because of my role as co-chair of the expert group of the High-Level Panel, or HLP, on sustainable ocean economy. This paper is produced to inform actions, including financing and investment, that countries in the HLP could undertake for a sustainable ocean economy. And as Justin has just highlighted just then, What is the sustainable ocean economy? It is about protecting the ocean, but not just protecting, but to be able to produce sustainably and therefore have prosperity, creation of jobs, and improving of livelihoods. The HLP members, as you have seen on that map, includes Indonesia and Jamaica. So I would like to thank Pak Luhut and Minister Nigel Clarke for joining us today. And we hope that the healthy oceans that is really the focus of the HLP will offer solutions for climate change, food security, energy supply, and creation of jobs and preserving livelihoods. Most of our discussions today begin with the challenging situation that all countries are facing with responding to the pandemic and its devastating impact on the lives of people. The ocean sector, as we all know, has also been hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic, as demand and supply shocks hit sectors that are based on ocean resources, such as tourism, fishery, energy, and transportation. And as we respond to the pandemic at the same time, we should also not forget the global challenge of climate change, which has and will also have dire impact on the lives of people. Our most recent poverty estimates indicate that extreme poverty will rise by over 100 million due to the pandemic. And our assessment also shows that if unaddressed, climate change could drive a further 68 to 132 million people into extreme poverty by 2030. So what is needed is for us to redouble our efforts to prevent the loss of development gains already achieved and build forward for a better future. As we are responding and going for the recovery path due to the pandemic, we should also be at the same time thinking about how to rebuild for a better future or a sustainable and inclusive economies. As we have heard many discussions in the recent months about sustainable recovery, they always just say green recovery. And blue recovery rarely features in the $10 trillion worth of stimulus packages allocated by governments to date to rebuild their economies. So I really want to just make 3 points today, how we can make the opportunity of the recovery programs that will be rolled out by countries, and hopefully there will be also global commitment on this for both a green and blue recovery. First, as well as green and inclusive filters, we also need to apply blue lens to the large economic stimulus and recovery packages that are being implemented globally. While the immediate focus of the recovery is to create jobs, there needs to be the right kind of jobs which look after natural capital at the same time. In the case of ocean, of course, this means ensuring our fisheries are sustainable, so that the fishermen whose livelihoods have been destroyed by COVID have a viable future. For small island states, it can also mean building forward ocean-based tourism in sustainable ways and finding ways to diversify sources of economic growth. And when we plan stimulus-funded infrastructure projects, we need to consider the potential impact of the world's coastal ecosystems. For instance, nature-based infrastructure such as mangroves, I know Indonesia is doing this, can provide a better natural barrier to intense storms than concrete seawalls or the traditional gray infrastructure often used. Healthy oceans are a lifeline for the poor, and COVID-19 has made it even more urgent that we address issues like plastic pollution, for instance. Second, as the report being launched today, we need to ensure that barriers are removed so that the next generation of financing can support a blue economy. We at the World Bank has played a leading role in building support for the implementation of the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Principles, which look at how we can deliver sustainable ocean financing in the time of COVID-19. We are also using financing mechanisms such as the Seychelles Blue Bond and other instruments to see how we can help developing countries address their debt situations due to COVID, while helping to unlock financing for nature or climate. In parallel, we also get the right policy incentives in place, which includes doing away with harmful fishing subsidies that don't necessarily benefit the small-scale fishermen that they were intended to benefit, drive overcapacity, and even worse, goes towards illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. I believe Rashid may be addressing this topic later. My final point is that the recovery from COVID-19 offers an opportunity to reset and make progress in addressing our overpolluted, overexploited, and underfinanced oceans. In the months ahead, we have the chance to set evidence-based, measurable targets to reverse the dramatic decline of biodiversity, including in our oceans. The Conference of the Parties on the Convention of Biological Diversity will decide over the next year a new global biodiversity framework. This could produce a new global deal for nature that shifts how we produce food, build infrastructure, and protect the planet from climate change. We must make sure that oceans is front and center in these efforts. So let me close by saying that we need to seize this moment, redouble our efforts, and deepen our commitment to healthy, sustainable oceans. Thank you, and I look forward to the upcoming discussions.
Mari, thank you so much for a very eloquent and also succinct summary of some of the issues we're facing. And as Rashid, I think, is going to tell us, the world has changed so significantly from when we first started writing and thinking about the high-level panel, let alone this particular report. And so your clear direction that the stimulus packages really must find a way of including a blue lens could not be more important, not only to protect fisheries in the ocean, but also, of course, those very fragile communities who are so vulnerable to the effects of biodiversity loss, climate change, and COVID as well. So Mari, thank you, and thank you for your time in what is an incredibly busy week for you. If now I may ask Rashid Sumaila, who is the co-author of this report, to give us some of the highlights of what has become an extremely detailed piece of work. Rashid, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Justin, for the introduction. There are many people to thank, but as you know, time is always limited. But at least I should thank the audience for making the time to join us, because I know the opportunity cost of your time is very high. So thank you for that. And then one other thank is to the Prime Minister of Norway and her 13 other counterparts, heads of governments around the world, and the UN envoy for putting this together. It's amazing what has been produced so far in terms of science alone, and we'll be moving into action as we go. So this presentation is simply to whet your appetite, you know, so that you can go and look at the report. There's a lot of detail there, nuances there that I wouldn't be able to touch here. On the screen, you see my co-leads. We were 4, and you can see the names there. We have Melissa Walsh, and then Kelly Horo, and then Anthony Cox. And then at the bottom there, you have all our amazing co-authors. We're 22 in total from all over the world, all continents of the world, men, women, young, senior people working together to really produce this product. So, and I thank them all for the cooperation in doing this interdisciplinary finance work, actually. All right. Now, just to give you very quickly the main points. These are the main messages from the report. Number one, the ocean. The ocean economy is a cornerstone of the global economy, contributing trillions each year. So it's important to note this, because we live on land, we tend to forget the ocean. Other points that go with this is that the ocean is simply too big to ignore, right? We have 70% of the Earth's surface is the ocean, but it's not only about the size. There is so much coming out of the ocean for us, servicing people all over the world, that we just cannot mess it up. But that doesn't mean we cannot mess it up. We have to watch and manage it well, you know. So point number one. The second point is that despite the importance of the ocean, the sector is drastically underinvested. It's amazing when we start looking. We could identify only about 1% of the ocean economy that is directly used to support sustainable ocean activities, and this is quite shocking, right? If you have such a very important part of our lives, in fact, not just the economy. So, and when we look into the data, what we see is there are lots of public funds and private funds going into the sector, but generally not to do the kind of sustainable work we would expect, right? For example, the OECD says $4.7 trillion of subsidies goes to the oil and gas sector, and we know the connection to climate change here. Why do you do that? All these resources, if only used properly, could actually help to manage our oceans properly and in an equitable way also. So the third point is, with climate change, pollution, and overfishing putting a mounting pressure on the ocean, it is crucial to protect it, right? It's crucial to protect and manage human activities if we are to keep our ocean alive and make it possible for it to continue supporting us, not only us, also for future generations. When you think of climate change, it's quite scary, actually. The ocean temperatures, the sea surface temperature is rising, the acidification is increasing, and also the oxygenation, less and less oxygen in parts of the ocean. And all of this cumulatively, if we don't check this, it's going to be a really big deal for us. So, fourth point, to do this effectively and achieve a sustainable ocean economy, significantly greater finance need to be made available, both from the public and private sectors. Remind you, at all levels, we need to do more. Because as we all know, good projects and good policies die at the altar of insufficient finance. No matter how good your plans and projects are, if you don't have adequate financing, it goes dead. And so we need to do more here. Now, next slide, you will see. So from here, I'll be strengthening some of the points made. The ocean economy is currently at risk from multiple stresses, as I mentioned, in terms of climate change alone. But you also have overfishing, you have the pollution, you have plastic being pumped into the ocean. My God, so we have a lot of work at hand. And to sustain ocean health, it is crucial that we work hard to restore, protect, and effectively manage how people relate to the ocean, you know, and the impacts we generate. These activities all need financing. You need to finance restoration, protection, management, and setting the parameters for the private sector to actively engage without facing too much risk. Ocean finance is therefore critical to achieving a sustainable ocean economy. However, current investment fall well below, as I mentioned earlier. Just to give you an example, I mentioned the 1%, that's about $13 billion we saw actually over 10 years. And this is official development assistance that goes directly to helping manage the ocean. And then you have the subsidies I mentioned. I mentioned oil and gas, but then you also have fisheries that we see $35 billion of subsidies going in. 22 billion of those are considered harmful because they encourage overfishing, overcapacity, sometimes illegal fishing, and so on and so forth. And these resources need to be redirected to help them work for the ocean and work for people. Remember, the two have to work together, otherwise we are in trouble, right? And this is a specific example from the Mediterranean, where a large shortage of what is needed to actually create marine protected areas that will support the ocean and make it more sustainable. Yeah. Then, but we're talking about all the challenges and how important, but there are opportunities here. I mean, in a recent report we co-authored, and there were about 100 scientists, economists who came together to do the cost-benefit analysis of creating, meeting the 30 by 30 target that many scientists and now countries are advocating, the UN are advocating. And we found that for every dollar you put in, we will get $5 back. So this is good investment. And this is what really surprises me. The nature and the ocean, this is the ultimate investment we can make, because without them, there is no us. I mean, what is life without the ocean? Half of our oxygen is generated from the ocean. So at least close to half of what we breathe is actually provided by the ocean. Without that, we are all dead, actually. So So investing in effectively managed MPS can increase habitat protection, as we know, and ecosystem resilience. We are talking about COVID. The COVID incident has made us realize that our economies and our social systems and our environmental protection measures are inadequate to face really big bangs and big shocks like COVID-19. That should make us start thinking hard on how to strengthen our systems overall. So in terms of that, if we can only muster the courage and the political will to redirect the subsidies that I mentioned to help the system, that would be fantastic. I'm going back to the subsidy because we estimate that at least 80% of the subsidies that goes to the fishery sector actually goes to the large scale. And there are huge implications here in terms of the overfishing, but not only that, in terms of equality and equity, most of it goes to the large scale industrial. Many of our coastal people are in the small scale business, women are there, and youths are there. So we are just disadvantaging a large swath of people. And then the barriers, that is a barrier to start with, but there are other ones. Current frameworks that guide blue investment do not set out consistent and universally adopted principles. We need principles, we need general rules that can really help the private sector to come in and invest in ways that support the ocean and support people. There are still gaps in our understanding, so we need more knowledge to understand the intricacies and connections to investment and to sustainability and to people equality. So there's a lot of work. Activities like oil and gas and unsustainable fishing, which create negative impacts on the environment, are heavily subsidized. And this is really something we need to do. Again, with COVID, this is an opportunity to actually make our public spending, at least the public spending, to be such that it prepares us and make us stronger rather than undermine us. And there are beautiful things happening. Just to give you an example from Canada, with COVID, the government advanced some billions to the oil sector to employ people to go clean up what they call dead wells, where oil rigs are put in there and then they move and leave it, and it's polluting the ocean and the land. And so we are using COVID money to employ people and to clean up those kind of things. So that's the kind of thinking we need to do. And when we do that, the private sector can then come in, right? They need this nice enabling environment in order to do productive and also sustainable investments. Now, let's go. So these are the barriers we need to take care of. And like I said, there are lots of things in the report, and it will be good to go check in and get the details of this. My final slide is about actions. You know, we're not only looking for highlighting the issues and the problems and the challenges. We want to highlight the opportunities and potential things we can do to help the ocean and help people. And here are 7 of them very quickly put up. First, you need to set up and implement new common guidelines and principles that help define what sustainable investment in the ocean would look like. And these are high-level principles that can be applied in all parts of the world, in small countries, large countries developing. They should be flexible at that level enough for each country to be able to adjust it to meet their needs. Strengthen knowledge base, data, capacity. Capacity is important, especially in the developing parts of the world. We need to pump up and work together and raise the capacity of people so that we can do this properly and effectively. Create supportive and inclusive enabling environment. Economists always talk about the enabling environment. You need institutions, you need setups for actors, private individuals to be able to meet their own goals whilst meeting society's goals. So that's important. Stimulate the pipeline of investment, investable, sustainable projects. There's a lot happening in this area now. Very creative things are happening. We have different actions. In fact, I saw some examples from South Africa and Ghana, which is very encouraging. So what we are talking here is not just about the developed world. Developing countries can make use of these principles and ideas in order to help the ocean and help the people. Remember, we want these two to work together. Explore new financing mechanisms and tools. Again, many are coming on board, but we need to do more. develop best practices to incentivize sustainable behavior. Again, this goes to the institutions. And here we are not talking about big economic institutions only. We are also talking about social norms and behaviors. There are things you just don't do in some societies. And the more we can use those to support economic incentives, the better. Finally, insurance has a big role to play here, and the insurance sector deals with risk. And risk is one of the reasons why the ocean investments are lacking to some extent. So how do we use our insurance companies to ensure that risks are properly mitigated in ways that support the ocean and support businesses and support the people, right? So you need to do that. For example, insurance shouldn't be insuring vessels that engage in illegal fishing. That should be a no-go. And so there are many ways that insurance can also support us. To really conclude, I want to say that from what we have done, the potentials are high. If we invest, we're going to get a lot of benefits. Companies will make money and society will benefit. That's what we want. We don't want companies just running off with the money short term and leaving society with big hazards. We want to make the two work together. So investing in nature, investing in the ocean is investing in people if we do it properly. And I hope you are all on board, and thank you so much for your attention. And yeah, thanks. Please read the report. There's a lot more than I can tell here.
Rashid, thank you so much. If I may, ladies and gentlemen, just to thank Rashid not only for the work that he's done in writing this report, but also for his astonishing contribution to this general debate over many years. One of the joys which sadly I haven't been able to have is to attend one of his lectures, because your students must be extremely activated after having sat in and listened to you speak. You write and speak amazingly well, and thank you so much for your insights. And particularly, I suppose, on those points that the system that we currently have is just inadequate to cope with the triple crisis that we're facing in terms of biodiversity loss, climate change, and now COVID, and the need to generate not just public sector investment, but also private sector. And this is obviously the catastrophe we're facing is an opportunity which not only can't be wasted to generate new policies and programs and investments, but indeed it may be one of our last chances to turn this very complicated and complex situation around. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to have a panel session, which is going to be comprised, I mentioned before, of Mari Pangestu, Minister Pandjaitan, Minister Clarke, and Ingrid van Wees. Mari, if I may start with you, the World Bank has been extremely quick off the mark in dispersing a very significant amount of money in this post-COVID situation we find ourselves in. And the World Bank has taken a leadership position in trying to identify the ways that these stimulus packages can be grounded, as you say, both in a blue and green investment and to generate jobs and to create this level of fiscal headroom, which is going to be so important. The bank has an enormous variety of tools at your disposal. And I'm just wondering, of all those which you feel you can deploy, which are those which you can most effectively? And how do you think they're able to generate not just public sector investment, but also the critical element of private sector investment, which will be required to sustain our economic recovery from this stage?
Well, I think just to put on the record that the World Bank is very committed to climate action, so that even in the last fiscal year 20, where we have been rolling out emergency programs and relief programs, 30% of that, of the 70 billion or around 20 billion, is actually has very high climate co-benefits. So I think it's about making sure that we keep addressing the climate action front and center. And I think to the point that Rashid was making about, and all of us have been making, we need to invest in nature. And we need to find, and once we understand that investing in nature is about investing in people, as was just eloquently said, we need to recognize that nature is an asset that is part of the wealth of countries. And for developing countries, actually, half of the wealth is actually nature-based. So especially for the development issue, I think ensuring that we account for the natural capital, not just the physical and financial capital, is very important. And the type of work that we do is, first of all, trying to emphasize that point and encouraging countries as we are rolling out the recovery program to take a nature-based, to find nature-based solutions. And there are many examples. I'll give you a few examples. One is to actually integrate your natural-based accounting into your economic planning and into your budgets, right? And a number of countries have been exemplary in this. Rwanda is one example. Actually, Indonesia, another part of WRI, is working with Indonesia on the low carbon development trajectory, which is now actually adopted in the national planning, as well as trying to describe a green stimulus program within the government's recovery program. And we have examples of working in India, where we have mapped entire coastline to manage the coastal space and providing protection for the shoreline, so that it's about mangrove replanting. And 1.7 million people have benefited from that. So you go from the kind of the macro to some of the more micro projects, where you find opportunities in the recovery to create jobs, livelihoods, and at the same time also have a blue outcome or green outcome. Another example, because I think Jamaica and many small island states are members of the high-level panel, is the work we do with the Pacific, which help to build back the resilience of the ecosystems of which fishing and tourism are going to be relying on, right? So let's take this opportunity to build back for sustainable ocean-based activities in the Pacific Islands and in the small island states, so that we can recover the fishing, we can recover the tourism, although at the same time, we're also helping them to diversify their sources of growth. So those are just some examples, but I think the key is, let's find nature-based solutions, and I think also find ways to identify reforms that will create the right type of environment for private investment to come in and also rebuild better.
Thank you very much indeed, Mari. We will come back to a couple of those points in a moment, but that was extremely helpful, and particularly as focus on nature-based solutions as well. It's excellent that after so many years, institutions like the World Bank and the IFIs generally, this nature-based solutions approach is suddenly becoming front and center. It will make an enormous difference, I think. If I may now turn to your countrymen as well. Lovely to have two representatives from Indonesia on the panel today. Minister Pandjaitan, you are with the enormous responsibility of having an entirely integrated ministry across these areas. And Indonesia, of course, is renowned for not only taking a proactive stance on the fishery sector, but also in trying to include ecosystem management. And I was just wondering if you could help us by, I suppose, defining the key challenges at this precise moment that you think are most urgent that need to be addressed, and to the extent to which public and private sector finance might be able to contribute to their resolution. Minister, thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me introduce about Indonesia. Indonesia, I think, the largest archipelagic country. Our population today is like 273 million. Our economic growth, last year it was, we grew like 5.3%, but right now I think contraction the first quarter 5.32%, and this third quarter around maybe 2.9 or 2.6%. And this is, I think, Indonesia, and Indonesia consists of 17,504 islands. If you don't believe me, you count by yourself. And I think Indonesia has the second largest coastline globally, 108 kilometers after Canada, and it has the largest and most diverse of coral reef, mangroves, and seagrass ecosystem on Earth. I just come back from central Java to see the mangrove area that we're planting like 140,000 hectares for the next 4 years. So this is about Indonesia, but let me now move to response to your question, Justin. You know, there are three main issues in creating a sustainable fishery sectors in Indonesia. I think investment in the fishery sector, which is I think very important for us. And before I continue, I'd like to thank you also to Professor Rashid with his very deep and very, you know, comprehensive lecture, should I say, because I learned from your introduction about this. And now let me also move to what we are doing in Indonesia today, investment in the fishery sectors. We have 11 fishery management areas in the vicinity of Malacca Strait and West Sumatra, Indian Ocean, South Java, and some other 11. We have 11, which is I think a lot. This area decided to be a model for integrated and sustainable fishery management area. So we are doing this one. So we have 11. So out of 11, we have three priority right now. Our target first, the three areas that we will focus on. Area near South China Sea. South China Sea, very important for us. And number two, area near Maluku Sea. Maluku Sea, this is I think the biggest area for fishery in that in our country. And the last one is area near Arafura Sea. Arafura and Maluku basically very near to each other. Investment is not investment in this area are not limited to the infrastructure development, but also downstream industry for fishery products. So we like to see also fishery industry over there. I'll give you an example. This is, I think, the industry. But the other one, we also export direct call from Manado to Japan. This is during this COVID-19. I think they began like 2 months ago. So every week, one cargo direct flight from Manado to Japan, which is I think good since early this year we already focused on those three areas. Number two, improvement in the fishery licensing. Currently, the number of boats larger than 100 GT is very limited. We like to increase that number because they can go to open sea. Otherwise, we cannot go to the exclusive economic zone and open sea. The government also revised the regulation that the fishery can be done using boats that are made abroad, but they should use Indonesian flag, register their office in Indonesia, and it's owned by the owner Indonesian citizen. This is, I think, very important also for us, but in the same time, we don't want to see overfishing. This is, I think, important. So how do we control? That's, again, the technology have to be involved in this. Number three, I think simplified licensing in aquaculture sector, especially shrimp. Now we have so many good area that we can grow shrimp, like in Sulawesi, in the southern part of Java. Now the program moving forward very well. The government, because of the COVID-19, part of the stimulus also we allocate for the shrimp area. And we realize to increase our ease of doing business cannot be done unless there is a structural reform, including licensing area, to reduce the bureaucracy and help private sector. Since we already passed omnibus law last week, I think could give the new era of Indonesia, because we cut a lot of red tape, make it easy for investors to invest in Indonesia, but at the same time, they have also to take responsibility to maintain environment in this regard. Online single submission is a system that integrates licensing process under each ministry or government body that is done electronically. Therefore, we also reduce face-to-face meeting with officials. This also could reduce corruption in this country. I should say not corruption, inefficiency. So less and less face-to-face contact. We just using all the digital. Through the reform in the licensing processing, we are push standardization in the central and local government to be easier, faster, and more integrated. What I'm saying this is not planned, already moving. We just to push, make it faster in order to see the result soon that benefit also the people of Indonesia. Now let me move to the types of public and private sector investment. Carbon credit Indonesia, I think Professor Rajiv mentioned about this one. Indonesia has 75 to 80% of global carbon credit that is composed of rainforest, mangrove, peatland, you name it, seagrass, coral reef. We have everything. We just replanted coral reef in Bali, in Nusa Dua. That's part of the stimulus program. This morning I went to Brebes. This is, I think, 50 hectares of the mangrove, part of the 600,000 hectares 4 years program mangrove planting in Indonesia. This is a thing we are doing because we understand this is very important for Indonesia because the carbon contribution from the mangrove 4 times bigger than some other forestry. So I really enjoyed this morning with our program over there, and I talked to Ibu Satu, the rep of the World Bank in Jakarta. We like to see this program cannot be only with Indonesia because the size of this 670,000 hectares, that's a lot. So we need like maybe over $1 billion program for the next 4 years to planting this mangrove. Mangrove in Indonesia, like I mentioned earlier, around 3.4 million hectares and are like 25% global mangrove. It's equal to 33 gigatons of carbon credit of 950,000 tons of carbon per hectare. So I just give you the number. These have to work together. I don't think that Indonesia only can do it alone. And the benefit of this, not only for Indonesia, but I think globally could enjoy the result of this, the contribution of the carbon credit. Back 2015, we have critical mangrove area, 1.8 million hectares. But we been working very hard, but we implement the rehabilitation program. Now the critical mangroves is reduced to 670,000 hectares and classified as a healthy mangrove area. We have, I think, over 100 species of mangroves in Indonesia. So I was amazed, this morning because I was, by boat under the, under canopy of the mangrove, and then you can feel maybe like 2 centigrade cooler than outside. Unbelievable. I never been in this kind of environment, but I can tell you this is something that we should experience. Ladies and gentlemen, during COVID-19, we are more aggressively in rehabilitating this mangrove area. We target to rehabilitate, like I mentioned, 670,000 hectares for the next 4 years. This is, I think, the big mega project for Indonesia. Not only for Indonesia, globally. Yeah, again, globally, because out of 3.4 million hectares that we're going to planting like 670,000 hectares of mangrove. Our program will include mangrove planting, development of trekking nursery, training on processing of mangrove products and derivatives, ecotourism, revive the economy of people affected by COVID-19 pandemic, carbon assessment. Now, let me last part of my response to all of you. Peatland Indonesia has peatland, we have 7.5 million hectares, depth like 50 meters, different than peatland in Scandinavia countries. So maybe they have larger, but they very shallow peatland. But we have a 50 meters depth peatland in Indonesia. It has a carbon credit equal to 55 gigaton or 37 of global tropical peatland carbon credit. So you can imagine 37%. So if you're talking about global climate change, you should look at Indonesia, because Indonesia can be part of this solution. Rainforest in Indonesia has 1,225 million hectares, the third largest globally. It has carbon credit 25.11 gigaton or 200 ton per hectare. So ladies and gentlemen, this is about Indonesia. We are more than happy to establish collaboration with any country globally, because again, cannot be done by Indonesia. And World Bank is a very good partner for us. I'm so happy to inform Ibu Mari that our coordination with Ibu Satu going very well. And we're going to have a meeting next week to follow up this. I'm not only talking, I'm doing this, I promise you. I'd like to invite you, ladies and gentlemen, to see something happen in Indonesia about this mangrove, about peatland, about how do we restore this, and about also coral reef, and what else? Yeah, there's so many things happen in Indonesia. That's, I think,
marine plastic. Marine plastic.
Marine plastic. Marine plastic, we are working very hard. I'll show you, Justin, how do you tackle the dirtiest river on earth, Citarum River. Right now, after 2.5 years, you can see much better than 2 years ago. It was declared by the Washington Post at the time, the dirtiest river on earth is Citarum River. Today, I promise you, we are much better than 2.5 years ago. Thank you.
So thank you so much for that, and that very comprehensive answer to the question. And I'll come back to a couple of those points in a second, but also to congratulate you for the work that you're doing, and particularly the mangroves, equally in the plastic. I mean, having spent some time in Indonesia,
oh, thank you.
Well, plastic pollution was not an inconsiderable problem. So any progress on that is to be congratulated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, very much. If I may now turn to Minister Clarke, Minister of Finance from Jamaica. Minister, you, and also thank you for persevering, because the communications have been complicated. So thank you so much for this. Jamaica, like other small island states, is really at the very sharp end of these three crises, and particularly with the collapse of the tourism industry from COVID-19 and the very complicated issues around fiscal headroom and how to generate economic growth when such a major driver of the economy has effectively evaporated. You are, as a country, part of something called the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment, which is trying to help provide ways of getting incentives for resilience into financing. I just wondered, from your own perspective, and I suppose given the wider extent of the issues of debt and the need for new financing, the mobilization of new resources, how you see the blue economy playing a constructive contribution to this particular problem, because you are facing a significant set of issues here.
Thank you, Justin, and good morning. And good morning to the distinguished keynote speaker, panelists, and participants. Let me just start with the premise that you mentioned, and then just briefly describe what we have done, and conclude with how the blue economy can help alleviate some of the challenges that you identified, including the challenge of a narrow economic base and the need for more investment and diversification. So with your premise, I mean, Jamaica has made significant strides over the past several years in enacting fiscal reforms that have led to a dramatic, or certainly pre-COVID, a dramatic reduction in debt, the likes of which there are not many examples in the world where this has been achieved without debt write-off, without debt forgiveness, but purely due to reform efforts and fiscal reform efforts and the management of the economy. That being said, the economy is heavily weighted towards tourism, and by heavily weighted, what I mean is Tourism accounts for about 10% of GDP directly and about 10% for jobs directly. However, there are indirect linkages with the rest of the economy in agriculture and in craft and in small and medium-sized supplies. And very significantly, as a domestic export, it provides a significant amount of the foreign exchange that Jamaica needs on an annual basis, as much as between 40 and 50%. Now, tourism has been the most consistent and highest growing sector of our economy for over 25 years. However, the growth in output over that 25 years was lost within 3 short months in the beginning of this pandemic. Clearly, the productive capacity exists. The hotels are still exist. The plant still exists. But as far as output is concerned, the output declined by nearly 90% in the first quarter, and that compares with the overall decline in economy of around 18%. So tourism accounted for half of the decline in the overall economy when you look at the size of the tourism sector and the decline in that sector itself, and you compare it with the decline overall. Now, Jamaica is also vulnerable to climate change, and on a regular basis, annual damage anywhere between 0.5% to 2% of GDP. That's just routine damage. Even now, we're going through tropical storm kind of rains, damaging infrastructure and roads. And this is not the kind of damage that you hear about in the international news, because it's regular, it's everyday, it's a part of the everyday experience, and it's not the Category 5 hurricane that makes sort of international news. So climate change is real, and the damage from climate change, presents a fiscal drag on the economy. And clearly, we are susceptible to other exogenous shocks. In the past, commodity price shocks and shocks from geopolitical developments have wreaked havoc on the economy. Now, it is in that context that we would posit that the blue economy matters. That, as other speakers have mentioned, the blue economy matters for a number of reasons. The Earth is a blue planet, and 3/4 of our surface is covered by seas, and oceans serve a variety of purposes, ranging from the provision of food to renewable energy and sustenance and preservation of life on Earth. Now, in that context, Jamaica's exclusive economic zone, which includes all of its marine territory, is about 235,000 square kilometers, and that compares with about 11,000 square kilometers of landmass. So exclusive economic zone is 20 times our landmass, which that alone should speak to the potential of the blue economy to add to our economic vitality, but I'll get to that more in a second. Now, the majority of the population, about 61%, lives within 5 kilometers of the coastline, and the FAO in 2017 produced some data that show that Jamaica has one of the highest consumptions of fish per capita, and fishing is a major source of livelihood. About 23,000 persons are involved in fishing in Jamaica out of a working population of just over 1.1 million, so maybe about 2% of the population, from 187 fishing beaches across the island, and we have lots more who are engaged in aquaculture. Now, recognizing the importance of the blue economy, we have taken a number of steps, and I'll just list them over the past few years, including the establishment of the multi-agency National Council on Ocean and Coastal Zone Management. A dolphins policy and trade in the wildlife policy have also been finalized. And just last year, or just the year before rather, we approved a new Fisheries Act, which will provide a legal and regulatory framework to ensure the sustainability of that sector. And at the beginning of 2019, the government imposed a ban on the importation, manufacture, distribution, and use of certain kinds of plastics, which includes single-use carrier shopping bag plastic, expanded polystyrene foam, and plastic drinking straws. So we're actively working to enhance the capacity of the blue economy to deliver for the Jamaican people by engaging in sustainable practices. Now, what role does a sustainable blue economy model have in diversifying risk and widening the economic base and enhancing investment? I mean, the quick answer to that is a significant role. As your question pointed out, we have made tremendous strides in fiscal, monetary, and other structural reforms that have given birth to a new Jamaica, certainly pre-COVID. COVID has complicated matters somewhat, but certainly pre-COVID has given rise to sort of a new set of opportunities. And the blue economy, you know, with the sustainable practices that we are regulating, offers a lot of hope. I mean, for one, having the opportunity to sustainably fish in an area 20 times the landmass of Jamaica provides a significant opportunity for economic livelihood for coastal communities and for diversifying our export base. Marine transportation, marine renewable energy, wind, wave, and tidal energy. Jamaica has been highly dependent in the past on fossil fuel energy and on HFO in particular, the most damaging form of fossil fuel energy. And the opportunity exists. We have engaged in a lot of diversification over the last several years with the introduction of LNG, but LNG is still a fossil fuel base. And with our significant blue economy resources, we could diversify into marine, wind, and other forms of marine-based energy. And the potential for growth in the blue economy also includes, Jamaica has a very leading tertiary institution that engages in education of young people in maritime activities. It's called the Caribbean Maritime University, and they export graduates all around the world to work in the maritime industry. And the growth of the maritime and blue economy presents a tremendous opportunity for the growth of that small subsect of the Jamaican economy. Fishing, our fishing is largely small fishermen and not, only beginning to be commercialized and industrialized in big ways. And as we implement policies that are sustainable and practices that are sustainable, there's a huge opportunity for industrial scale sustainable fishing and for diversifying into shrimp and exotics like sea cucumber and seaweed. Surveys of the ocean speak to the vast quantities of, and I shouldn't say this too loudly, but of lobster, in north of Jamaica. There's extremely vast quantities, but the technology to sustainably harvest those resources is not yet being deployed in Jamaica, and the regulation is not. A lot of the food and safety handling regulation is not consistent with industrial scale activity. And therefore, there's a lot of work to do there. A lot of opportunity in seafood processing and packaging, not necessarily food that is captured in our maritime borders, but could consist of what we capture in our maritime border, but also what we import from neighboring maritime zones. And for that to be processed and packaged and exported from Jamaica, we have private entrepreneurs have entered that space in the last several years and have grown tremendously, which speaks to the volume of opportunity that is available. There is also opportunity for maritime transportation and port-related activities with the expansion of the Panama Canal to accommodate post-Panamax vessels and the trade between East and West, even though there's some disturbances to that at the moment. But the passage through the Panama Canal onto the eastern seaboard of the United States, most of those ships pass through that 235,000 square kilometers of Jamaican maritime space. You can track and you will find that a big majority of those ships coming through pass somewhere in that space. So huge opportunities for port and related activities. And we recently privatize our main port in Kingston to a consortium of international investors who are investing to expand the port and make it accessible to these larger post-Panamax vessels. And then there's a huge opportunity for boat construction and maintenance, for net and gear making and other related activities that can sustain the blue economy. So the potential is significant, and countries like Jamaica need to pursue a diversification strategy. While we continue to grow in tourism, we want to, and it's going to be very important that other industries emerge that can provide sustainable livelihoods for people, that can provide foreign exchange for our country, and that can allow us to continue to sustainably develop as we move towards achievement of the goals that are common to all of us. Thank you very much.
Ms. Clarke, thank you very much indeed for that very thorough answer. I think, curiously, both your answer and also that of Mr. Pandjaitan from Indonesia both illustrate the opportunity, but also part of the problem, I suppose, all the issues we're facing, which is that whilst the blue economy is capable of going to scale and helping to meet economic growth targets and macro policy issues, it can only really be done on a sustainable basis. And we have suffered so many decades of it not being sustainable. And that issue of if we now move into maximum resource utilization in order to attract maximum resource mobilization is going to put us into a very complicated place very quickly, which is not going to be sustainable. And I think part of this can be addressed through some of the frameworks which have been discussed elsewhere, the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the issues I mentioned around the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment, the Blue Economy Finance Principles, which I think we'll discuss later, but also this issue of integrated ocean management plans as well, to provide a clear and transparent framework so that resource utilization can happen not only effectively, but very much within the context of ecosystem functionality and making sure that things can operate on a sustainable basis. And therefore, if I may, and just with the interest of time, and with my apologies to Ingrid, because I'm going to load a sort of an extra thought in the question to you, which I think is generic, though, to what our previous panelists have been talking about, which is that given that sort of slightly curious, well, not curious, but the explicit dialectic between resource mobilization, resource utilization, and environmental functionality and protection, and the desperate need to get the private and the public sector investing, but at scale, the key determinant to so much of this is risk. And how we manage risk and the effective mechanisms to do so will probably be the key to unlocking some of the solutions that we have. You are wonderfully an expert in the subject. The ADB has put out many billions into the blue economy space. And I just wondered how you saw not only the instruments that you have available, but how they might be deployed in this sort of multifaceted way to address risk as an impediment to investment and sustainability.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Justin. Well, I would like to start to congratulate the Ocean Panel and this team for the very comprehensive report on ocean finance, which provides, I think, very clear guidance and insights to anybody interested in this particular segment. Now, talking about risk, I think the biggest risk that the industry is facing is actually the risk of inertia. If nothing moves, the whole industry will, at the end of the day, be very damaged. There are a lot of opportunities, but we see reluctance from investors. What is driving that reluctance? That reluctance is linked to a lot of common financial risks, such as credit risk, revenue shortfalls, but also regulatory risk and technology risk. What we can use are principles of demonstration projects and pilots that can reduce some of those risks. Technologies can be tested as well as innovative revenue models. An example of a technology is a project in which ADB is working with the European Space Agency to look at the application of technology from Earth observation satellites to monitor shipping movements in their exclusive economic zones, to come up with a financially viable way to monitor and report what's going on in the zones to make sure that the due revenues are paid to the government of Kiribati. That project is financed by a special fund of ADB. Then if we move to, where am I? If we move to credit and revenue risks of sustainable initiatives, these can be addressed by either the structure of the transaction itself or by financial instruments. So I'll start with the structures. Here we can think about a public-private partnerships, but for a green port or for another large infrastructure facilities, in which the public and private sector each take the risks for which they are best suited to manage and control it. That allows for allocation of the risk to the private sector to such an extent that it becomes acceptable for the private sector and these funds can be attracted. Now, when I move on to financial instruments, for credit risk, we can work with instruments like equity or subordinated finance to enhance the potential and the bankability for commercial finance to come in. So here we're thinking about a blend of concessional subordinated finance together with private sector finance in order to attract a larger pool of funding to these very transactions. The second point is revenue shortfalls. These can be addressed with supplements from, for example, blue credit or subsidies, similar to a feed-in tariff for renewable energy. The difference with taking credit risk is that at the credit risk principles of the credit risk instruments I just described, these instruments take the complete investment risk. Now, when we are subsidizing revenue shortfalls, this can be done by government or other institutions or particular funds. They don't run the risk of project completion and construction. They just support the revenues once a service or product is generated as part of the blue economy. Now, last but not least is regulatory risk. This can be encountered by government approving a conducive regulatory and policy framework at an early stage of the transition. It will provide transparency, but also indicate commitment of the government to the development of this particular sector, which will wake up and induce interest from the private sector, which needs to see long-term frameworks and serious commitment from the government. Other strong signals of commitment, which are crucial to the attraction of long-term capital, are the phasing out of counterproductive and harmful policies, like removing barriers. So in addition to building a conducive ecosystem, for the transition to a sustainable economy, we also need to remove all the counterproductive and harmful policies. And I think it was earlier related to by Mari, calling it removing the barriers. And the second point is the establishment of a long-term financial facility dedicated to the support of a sustainable blue economy. This facility, which can be operated by local financial intermediaries, can collect funds from a broad range of stakeholders with very different return and risk expectations and appetites, which can be used to provide a wide range or a wide selection of blended financial instruments to help either managing the credit risk, revenue shortfalls, or other risks that can be taken away, need to be mitigated in order to attract capital markets, in order to attract commercial investors. Finally, to ensure that most of the funds are directed towards companies and services that provide a beneficial impact and away from industries that may be potentially harmful, we need to increase the transparency for all the investors in the market. This can be done by credit and ESG rating agencies opining not just on the terrestrial impact of certain activities, but also on the impact of our aquatic systems on our oceans and coastal systems. Now, what is the role of ADB? What are we doing? In addition to our regular loans, which can be used for ocean projects, we have launched in 2019 a 5 billion initiative to support the development of healthy oceans and sustainable blue economy. This will be spent, this 5 billion will be spent over a period of 5 years. It's partially grants to build capacity with the government, with institutions, and also to foster technological innovation. Like the example I mentioned, looking at satellite data for the use of IOU reporting and monitoring for Kiribati. The other part we work on is mobilizing finance for governments and for the project itself. So how do we look at that? We look at projects who are commercially viable. They can be financed via our regular private sector window. Then there are projects who need a little bit of assistance. Now, this assistance I've just described, either via mitigating credit risk, revenue support, regulatory risk, or addressing some technology risk. But then there are the projects who actually will never generate revenues to the sense that it makes them financially viable as a result of market failures, but who are essential components of the ocean economy and of the ecosystems and need to be addressed. Now, what could be revenue streams for those kind of investments? Well, either we can think about cross-subsidizing these investments from the blue ocean sectors that are profitable. We can use the licensing revenues, we can lose tax revenues, or perhaps any other participation revenues that can be channeled towards this. Another alternative that was mentioned earlier, subsidies who are currently counterproductive can be redirected towards these type of investments. So this is the global way, this is a comprehensive way of we think about investments who are financially viable, need a little bit of help, and those who need a lot of assistance because of market failures. Back to you, Justin.
Ingrid, thank you so very much. That's very kind. And in listening to what you were saying and then thinking very much what Minister Pandjaitan was saying, part of the deployment of your sort of army of risk management instruments, I think, is going to be very effectively focused perhaps in this issue of carbon, how to generate a carbon market from a blue economy which is able to support the sort of economic growth and poverty alleviation that is required, whether that's from nature-based solutions or from looking at some of the economic activities on the coast as well. Because the question we have, of course, is how to go to scale. So many of these nature-based solutions are fantastic, but they're very, very small. And how can we possibly get them to operate at a sufficient level to be effective? Ladies and gentlemen, panelists, in the interest of time, you've been very kind to hang on, but we have only now 16 minutes to go until the end of this session. And I know how busy you all are, and we would now, I think, move on to the question and answer phase of this webinar. If I may thank you all so much. You are all incredibly busy people in an incredibly busy week of the World Bank and IMF annual meetings. And if I may just say that your participation is not only an act of kindness, but also demonstrates how welcome and how clear is the blue economy now and the discussions that are going on in this post-COVID recovery world. So thank you so very much for your participation. Do please stay to listen to the other panels, but otherwise, thank you so very much. And I wish you a good day. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to a roundtable, quite brief one, where we can answer some questions. And on that roundtable, we have, again, Rashid Sumaila, we have Louise Heaps, and Anthony Cox. And there are a few questions which are popping up. The first one, if I may, I'd love to take from Ambassador Peter Thompson, who is the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Oceans, and is known to certainly all of us on the panel here, and probably to most, if not all, of those who are dialing in. Ambassador Thompson asks if it'd be possible to explain how countries, corporations, and organizations can sign up to the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Principles. As the person who has been leading so much of this work over the last 4 or 5 years, I wonder if Louise Heaps, you'd be kind enough to help guide the answer to that.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Justin, and thank you also for the opportunity to speak today. It's probably a good idea to just explain what they are, because I'm not sure that everybody would know. And they were born out of the understanding that whilst you know, new forms of finance are incredibly important to the system now, there's an enormous amount of finance continuing to go into the blue economy sectors which are not leading to sustainability. And so what we need is to guide substantive this mainstream finance towards sustainable blue economy pathways. And with this in mind, and recognising that there was a lack of global guidelines and guardrails available that were specific to the blue economy, there's certainly plenty out there, but there were none that really recognise the difference of the sustainable blue economy. WWF, the European Commission, European Investment Bank and Prince of Wales International Sustainability Unit created the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Principles, which were launched back at our ocean in Bali back in 2018. And these 14 principles provide basically the first global framework to guide investment decisions, as I say, along the most sustainable development pathways possible. And they're designed specifically to align with the Ocean Sustainable Development Goal. And they also complement a lot of the existing principles that are out there and frameworks such as the Equator Principles and the UNPRI. And by fostering this cooperation and communication on everything on the ocean, from ocean health, scientific research and data collection, technical innovation and so forth, they aim to sort of create this multi-sector shift towards a sustainable blue economy. And I think it's also important to say that they also recognise that the ocean requires this systems-based approach, and that many of the tools and mechanisms that we need and have been mentioned already today are already out there, such as marine protected areas, marine spatial planning and so forth. So whilst they're voluntary and non-regulatory at the moment, we believe that widespread adoption of these is really going to transform or could transform future ocean development. So I might as well also mention COVID, as everyone else has. It's so relevant to our time. They're obviously extremely important also in the context of COVID-19, and not least because of all these emerging stimulus and recovery packages that are being created. Billions of dollars are going into supporting these recovery. But we really need to make sure that finance is being targeted at building back bluer and that vision. So these principles in effect provide that sort of blue lens that Mari Pangestu sort of described earlier, that really show the vital role of the sustainable blue economy in providing sort of food, livelihoods and economic prosperity. So the principles themselves are now hosted by UNEP-FI, and they have a new platform which they launched last year called the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Initiative. And the principles have now been endorsed by a number of public and private sector organisations, including the World Bank, European Investment Bank, and just recently, actually, the Asian Development Bank, along with a number of asset managers. And so, in order to sign up to the principles as both a public and private sector entity, you would need to contact you would need to contact Dennis Fritsch at UNEP-FI and go through that process. Now, these are voluntary, and so, but it is relevant, entirely relevant as well for countries to sign up to these. There isn't necessarily a more formal mechanism to do that, but I would love to see next year at the UN SDG 14 meeting some kinds of commitment from a range of governments, as many governments as possible, recognising the importance of the sustainable blue economy and these kinds of guiding principles, this visionary sort of framework in supporting their decision making in terms of future investments, not just the recovery and stimulus packages, but also other financial investments that they make. So I'll just leave it there for now, but hopefully that's a sufficient answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Louise Neely. That's a very, very sufficient answer. Very kind of you. Thank you. Another question has come up as to how it might be possible to influence the EU taxonomy blue component so that international financial institutions and the broader finance community can make a real shift towards sustainable blue investments. I wonder who would like to, if anybody would like to talk about the EU taxonomy process.
Oh, perhaps Justin can
yes,
jump in on that one. So, and I think it's a great question, and I really hope that the report of the high-level panel helps to continue the momentum that we're seeing in the EU on defining a sustainable taxonomies and bringing that into fruition, being implemented so that we can ensure that the investments that are being made are indeed sustainable. Now, in the EU, the ocean-related part of the taxonomy is still, a bit of a work in progress. There's more work to be done on that, and I hope that we can maintain the momentum next year once the high-level panel has reported. If we're to learn one lesson from all the work in the last decade or more on green finance generally, it is that the power of disclosure, of risk, disclosure of exposure of shareholder assets is one of the critical and very effective mechanisms for driving more sustainable investment activity. And things like the taxonomy of these, the principles that Louise were just talking about, the principles that underpin the blue bonds that we're starting to see emerge are really important mechanisms in trying to get a better ocean-related ESG, environmental, social and governance disclosure in place. So I hope that we can continue that, and the OECD, for our part, are very heavily involved in that and will support it going forward.
If I may actually then, Anthony, just ask you a sort of subject question, which is probably a bit of a leading one, but by your answer then you would perhaps welcome linkages between the EU taxonomy, the TCFD, and the work of the rating agencies now to very much look at how climate risk and natural capital biodiversity risk are themselves determinant of resilience and economic growth. So you feel these three things coming together could make a material difference to investments? Absolutely.
I think that's a really good point, Justin. And I would add to that the task force on nature-related financial disclosures, which is just established along the lines of the climate one. So I think there's a momentum now behind this, but we have to recognise there are serious issues here around metrics, around indicators, and around a proliferation of standards and taxonomies around the world. And I think one of the things we keep hearing from the private sector and financiers is a plea for governments to bring more order to this in order to make it a little more transparent and to avoid the kind of greenwashing, or should I say blue washing, that we're at risk of. So.
Thank you. Yes, I think an issue of transparency is the lack of transparency in itself being a risk is something which should perhaps help drive that conversation forward. Thank you very much, Anthony. We have, ladies and gentlemen, just literally over 5 minutes left. If we have time for two more questions here. One is how it may be possible for the sustainable blue economy, how that momentum can be sustained in relation to the global dialogue on ocean sustainability, including critically, I suppose, the BBNJ discussions, the SDG ocean dialogues, as well as the CBD. And I think perhaps, Rashid, that may be one for you.
Yeah, I think there is, the issue with the ocean is that there are situations or businesses that affect what happens in the country's waters, EEZs, you know. So it's within the country's ability and capacity to actually handle. And then we have things that happen at higher scales at the global level. And BBNJ negotiations is one of them. The high seas is in general owned by all citizens of the world. So it's a common kind of property of everybody. So you need those kind of arrangements and management system and financing systems that look higher than just the national borders. And so we need those mechanisms. In fact, in our report, at some point, we actually, I think it's still there, we're talking about the need of institutions or even financing institutions at a higher global, regional levels that will then take care of all these things that cut across borders. Because as you know, the fish don't respect the borders we put on the map, right? They go where they go. And so we need such general high-level institutions, including financing systems.
Rashid, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, we have time for one last question, really. And it's a very good question. It is, however, one which probably deserves about 2 days discussion in its own right. So there's a question as to how the panelists can give views on the need for focusing on sector-specific financing strategies and a regular dialogue among IFIs on the financial needs and barriers and ways and means of catalyzing the financial flows to such sectors, the maritime sector being an example. So I suppose another way of reframing it might be to Anthony's point that there needs to be a clear set of risk management tools that actually can look at sector-specific policies, and to what extent can those be used in a generic way to drive change across the blue economy space? And I don't know, Anthony, is this perhaps one for you?
Well, I can have a first crack at it, and Rashid and Louise can jump in as well. But just briefly, I think the IFIs have seen the light, if you like, on sustainable development financing and the need to ensure that they have sustainability built into their lending criteria. The question really gets down to, is the ocean different? Is ocean finance different? And I think one of the challenges there is that it's multi-sector. There are an interesting mix of public and private goods where you don't always have the kind of revenue streams and bankable projects that investors are looking for. So from that perspective, I think the answer to the question is yes. I think we do need to get into more sector-specific financing as we get down to the details beneath the kind of the broad aspirational dimensions of the IFIs on sustainable investment.
Thank you, Anthony. Louise, Rashid, would you like to have a small answer to that?
I'll just have a very quick one, if that's okay. So just to say that I think in order to do that, we need to also have that sectoral guidance that's going to be needed for sectors to really understand how to move forward to sustainability. And that guidance in terms of the finance sector is currently being developed under UNEP-FI. With WWF. So it's only at the moment over 5 sectors, but I think those sort of actions are really starting to kick off now. And I see that, you know, once we get the holistic common framework in place, that these sectoral guidance and risk tools, etc., will need to be developed, and they are being developed now. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, very quick. You know, yeah, we need sectoral actions, but we also think across sectors naturally, right? Because they again interact with each other. And one thing, if you think of the ocean economy, the OECD is projecting about $3 trillion. And we talk a lot about enabling environment, and you need resources to do that. So if a fraction of this additional economic impact that comes from the ocean is taken and used to ensure that sectors are working sustainably within themselves and across, that will be lots of money. Even 1% of 3 trillion is a lot of cash, right? Think about 5%, and that will be enough to set up the kind of enabling environment we need to get the sectors to work well within themselves and across. Thank you.
Rashid, thank you so much. Panelists, and for those who spoke before as well, Mari Pangestu, Minister from Indonesia, Minister from Jamaica, Ingrid van Wees. I wish you could all see the comments which I'm seeing here, which are to say what a fantastic panel, what a rich conversation. It would be impossible to summarize such a deep and wide set of remarks. So thank you so much indeed for all your time. It's been a great panel. I've learned a huge amount, and you have all contributed enormously to this process in your own way, not least of all, many of you getting up at impossible early hours in the morning to participate in this. And thank you so much for what you've done. And also, if I may, Rashid, thank you so much for your leadership, your co-authorship on this particular paper. It is, as we can see, going to be widely used and read and disseminated. And thank you indeed for that. The details of where you can read the full paper are on your screen at the moment. And I should also say, as a final remark, that the final Blue Paper webinar is taking place on Thursday, the 28th of October at 10 a.m. GMT. And it would be fantastic if you could join us for that event. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you so much for your participation, your attendance, your contributions, and your interest. We have a great challenge. If all of us work together, we might perhaps have some chance of success. Thank you so much indeed.
Yeah, thanks. Wonderful.